The date is December 11th, 1997. The survivor is Риба Abramovitz. The interviewer is Janie Brown. We are in Scranton, Pennsylvania in the United States, and the language is English. The date is December 11th, 1997. The survivor is Риба, maiden name Abramovitz. The interviewer is Janie Brown. The city is Scranton, Pennsylvania in the United States, and the language is English. Can you please introduce yourself?
My name is Риба.
Can you spell your first name and your last name?
Revaskop.
What was your maiden name?
My maiden name was Abramovitz.
Can you spell that?
Abramowicz.
And how old are you today?
77.
When was your birth date?
My birthday was July 15, 1920.
Can you give the town where you were born and the country?
I was born in a town near Vilno called Holshany.
And can you spell Hoshany?
Holszany.
What country is that in?
Poland. It was Poland.
In your hometown of Hoshany, can you describe the main street in your town?
Yes. It was called Ulica Zamkova.
Can you spell that?
Yes. Zamkowa.
Zlitzkolva?
Zamkova.
Zamkova. And can you describe what the main street in your town looked like?
Yes, it was a nice street. Streets were paved. They had sidewalks for nice homes, mostly one-story homes.
Were there any stores on the main street?
No, mostly in a special section of town where they had all the stores.
Can you describe the business section?
Yes, it was all together in the middle of the town, and all the stores were sort of side by side in a row.
What kinds of stores?
All kinds of stores. Shoe stores, dress stores, all variety stores, hardware stores.
About how many people lived in your town?
I really am not sure, maybe about 10,000.
Of the 10,000, how many were Jewish?
About 3,000.
Was there any Jewish community organization within your
Yes.
town? Can you describe if there was a Jewish council or a Jewish organization?
Yes, there was a Jewish council, there was a synagogue, there was a Hebrew school, and there were different organizations for youth, like the Betar and the Shomer HaTzair.
What were some of the responsibilities of the Jewish council?
Well, they really supervised the activities of the people in town. They did a lot of, they had organization that helped the poor, that helped out. This was very important, organization that helped the people that couldn't, and otherwise there were businesses and so forth and so on.
Did you know any member of the from your family or a neighbor or a friend who was in the Jewish council?
Yes, my uncle.
What was his name?
Abrahmovitz.
In your town, you mentioned there was a synagogue. Can you describe what the synagogue looks like?
Yes, it was a two-story wooden building, and it was small. It's hard for me to describe. I was only 10 when I moved away from there.
Okay.
And I moved to Vilno.
Okay.
And that's where I lived since.
Where do you consider your hometown, the place that you think of when you go home?
Vilno.
Would be Vilna.
Yes.
Okay. Why did your family move? Do you have a sense of why they moved from Hoshany to Vilna?
First of all, I moved there to go to school. And my father moved because of business.
In Vilna, Can you describe your house?
We lived in an apartment in Vilna. We had a very nice and a nice residential section. We had a 3-bedroom apartment. And because there were 4 of us and my parents. It was called Ulica Venglova.
Can you spell that?
W-E-G-L-O-W-A.
Okay. When you think of your apartment and your house, can you list the people who lived in your house with you, your parents and your brothers and sisters?
Yes, my father, my mother, and my 3 brothers, and
What-
myself.
What was your father's name?
Shepsel,
And your mother's name?
Gutel,
Gudel.
Gutel,
And what was her maiden name?
Kozlovsky.
Can you list the names of your brothers and sisters and the year they were born?
Yes. My brother was born in 1921, one in 23, and one in 24.
The one who was born in 1920, what was his name?
I was born in
You were born in
19
20, and then you have a brother born in
21.
21. What
He
is his
was
name?
Gershon,
Okay. And who was born next?
Yitzchak,
And he was born in 24?
23.
23. And any more?
Yes, and my brother, lives now in Israel, my youngest brother, was born in 1924.
Did anyone else live in the house with you?
Yes, we had a young lady that stayed with us.
What was her role?
Well, she helped my mother in the house, and it's a long story, but I won't tell it now. My mother took her in. She was an orphan.
She was an orphan?
Yes, and she lived with us.
Okay. When you think of your mother, how would you describe your mother?
Oh, she was a wonderful person, and I was very, very close with my mother.
When you say she was a wonderful person, what kinds of things do you remember her doing?
Well, she did a lot of good things, and I was very close with her. I was the only daughter she had, and I was the oldest. I was really very close with her.
What kinds of good things did she do?
Well, she helped a lot of people. She did a lot of good things.
And what about your father?
My father was a businessman. He traveled a great deal in the area and all over Europe. He was in the flax business. He used to export that. And we had a factory where we used to be worked out and baled and then shipped all over Europe, to Belgium, mostly Czechoslovakia, Germany, England, and a factory in Poland.
Within your family, how did your family consider themselves religiously? Did they consider themselves Orthodox or traditional or conservative?
In Europe, most people were Orthodox. In our area, we belonged to the first in 37, 38. It was already one synagogue that in Vilna that turned conservative. The women still sat separately, but it was already the first movement. But otherwise, mostly it was the Orthodox movement.
Can you describe a Sabbath dinner on Friday night at your family's house?
Oh yes, it was beautiful. The table was always set nicely with the white cloth and the candles and the challah. And my mother used to prepare a very nice dinner. And after dinner, my father had a very good voice, and he used to sing all kinds of songs. And it was a very nice thing to do.
Who was at the Sabbath table with you? Who were the people?
Mostly it was family, just the family. Sometimes my uncle used to come. My father had a brother, or my mother had 2 sisters living there, so they would come. And for Passover, we used to have about 60 people at our Passover table, because my father would invite the people that used to work for him. because he started the business. My grandfather died when my father was 13 years old. And these people helped them. And we all called them aunts and uncles, and they all came to for every holiday to our house. Mostly Passover, it was a must.
Were the people who came from the business, were they all Jewish or Jewish and non-Jewish?
No, non-Jews. They were these people. Only the family was Jewish. The rest were non-Jewish people.
You mentioned that your father had a good singing voice, and he used to sing. Did he sing at all the holidays?
Well, mostly, you know, he was busy. He never had time, but used to walk and sing usually after the Sabbath meal. I remember that as a child.
Do you remember any songs that he sang?
All kinds of Hebrew songs from the prayer book and this kind of songs.
How was your birthday celebrated within the family when you were a child?
It wasn't really that big of a celebration, usually, when I was growing up. It wasn't really that much of a celebration, you know. My mother they would buy me a present or so on. But it wasn't celebrated really like we celebrate here.
What was your favorite holiday?
My favorite holiday was Passover.
Can you describe how the meal was prepared? Who prepared it? Did you have someone who came in to help?
My mother had help, but she prepared the food always herself. She prepared, and I remember we had an orchard, and my father used to prepare the haroshes himself and send it to the whole family.
Within the orchard, what kind of fruit was in the orchard?
Apples and pears and all kinds of berries and plums.
Within the area itself, were you involved in any Jewish youth organizations?
Yes, I belonged, since I was 7 years old, I belonged to the Betar.
Can you describe some of your activities with
Oh,
Betar?
yes, we were supposed to speak Hebrew. And we talked about Israel and different things. It was very interesting.
About how many people were in your youth group?
Oh, this was, it depends. When I was a child, it was a small group. But then in Vilna, it was quite a large organization, quite a few people.
Were there trips with the group?
No, not many. No, we just used to meet once a week and discuss things. We had meetings.
Within your household itself, what languages were spoken?
Well, we spoke Polish, Yiddish. I learned to speak Yiddish at the age of 12 because I spoke Polish and Hebrew, and I didn't know any Yiddish. So I learned at the age of 12. I studied on my own.
You taught yourself?
I taught myself, yes.
Were there any newspapers that you remember that were read in the
yes,
house?
Yes,
Do you remember which ones they were?
No, I don't remember the names, but they were Yiddish papers, and they were Polish papers, quite a few.
While you were living in Vilna, do you remember any Jewish theater
Oh, yes.
that you went to? Can you describe?
We had a Yiddish theater not far where we lived. My mother and father loved the theater. And they used to take me quite often because I was the oldest. I saw Ida Kaminska, I saw Sigmund Turkov yet, and Maurice Schwartz. I saw Maurice Schwartz in The Merchant of Venice and in King Lear in Yiddish. And there was also a marionette theater in Yiddish. We had quite a few theaters in the city. We had an operetta theater that was Polish, and we had a very nice city theater, also in Polish, and quite a few others. It was a very cultural city.
In thinking back on as a child, what other things did you do for fun?
We did a lot of things. We hiked, we swam, we used to go on canoeing. We had a very nice river. We used to go visiting. We used to go on skis in the winter from one town to another, cross-country skiing. We did. And it was fun.
Among your children, among your friends, Were there Jewish and non-Jewish friends?
Yes, I always had all kinds of friends.
Did your friends eat in your house and you eat in their house?
Yes.
Was there a non-Jewish person who helped out on the Sabbath, like doing any tasks, turning lights on
Well,
or
my mother
anything?
had helped in the house. She had helped because she worked in the business. She helped in the business. So she used to have help. And when we were little, she had a girl just for us, someone to take care of. We were so close in age, the four of us. So she used to have someone special for us. And the girls that used to stay, I still remember my mother would marry them off. She'd make the wedding for them. They'd work several years, and then we always had a wedding in the house. I remember several that she married off.
When you were growing up, do you remember your first school, the name of it, and can you describe
Sure.
it?
Oh, sure. My school?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it was called Beit Sefer Tarbut. And I went there for 4 years. And then I went to a Polish school. And then I went to in Vilna. It was called Gimnazjum Kupieckie, which was a commerce school. And there were only 2 schools like that in Poland. And of course, being a Jew, it was very hard to get in. Among 600, there were 8 Jewish students there. It was very hard to get into that school. And most of my friends were Polish then.
What were your goals? What did you want to be when you were growing up and studying in the
Well,
gymnasium?
I studied accounting. And then I was also accepted to an Academy of Commerce and Economy in Warsaw before I graduated. Never got there because the war broke out, but I was accepted there.
If we could go back a little bit to when you first started school, can you describe, now the first school was in Hoshani?
Yes.
Hoshani?
Yes.
Can you describe the first school? This was the Jewish school that you started at, the Hebrew school you started out with? How old were you when you started?
I was 6.
Were girls and boys together in classes?
Yes.
And who taught the
teachers? Were Jewish and non-Jewish teachers, because we had, the religious Hebrew, and we had the Bible we studied, but we had all secular subjects to study.
And
math and Polish, and no, we didn't study languages there, just Hebrew.
And you started the Polish school when you were 10 in Vilna.
Right. No, in Vilna I studied in a Polish school first. And then I graduated from 6th grade, I went into the Gimnazjum Kupieckie.
Do you recall when you were in school any difficulties you had being Jewish?
Not at first. The difficulty started in 1934 with Germany, and I don't know whether it was instigated or so, but there were stones thrown at us when we used to walk out. There were so few of us, and yet there used to be boys hanging around, and they would throw stones on us. In our school, we didn't have to sit separately, but most of the schools, after those years, they made the Jewish students sit to the left and the others to the right.
What was your favorite subject?
Math, counting, French. I loved most of my subjects. Physics, chemistry, I loved most of my subjects.
Do you remember a favorite teacher?
Oh yes. Her name was Pani Pawlikowska.
Can you describe her? Tell her why she was special?
She was very special because she was very kind and very, very nice person. I loved her. I was very close with her.
How old were you when she was your teacher?
About 14.
What subject did she teach?
She teach social studies.
What made her special?
She was very kind and understanding, and we could just talk things over with her. She was really nice about it.
Was she a Jewish or non-Jewish teacher?
No, there were no Jewish teachers in our school.
Okay.
No, because we went to school on Saturday.
Okay. When your family was in Vilna, how would you describe them economically?
I'd say middle class.
If you needed something like bread or milk or clothes, how did the family get those?
Well, there were stores, grocery stores, and used to buy it. I used to go with my mother. That was usually fun. On a special street where she used to buy her meat. It was called Ulica Yatkova, which means Butcher Street. And the women there, that were lots of fun. And by that time, I already spoke Yiddish, so I could understand. And it was very interesting to go. My mother used to take me with her.
Can you describe one incident or one time when you went with her?
Well, we used to go, and if you stopped by a stall, and if you didn't buy it, they used to curse you. And it was, at that time, I had learned, and I read Shalom Aleichem, so it was very close to me, and it was to see it really, and touch it, and hear it. It was fun.
Within Vilna itself, were there Jews who were, that you saw, who wore the more traditional clothing, the black clothing, Hasidic?
Not in our area. There were some, but not the majority. In our area, people just dressed like everybody else.
Did you have any special clothing for school?
Yes, we wore uniforms to school.
Can you describe the uniform?
Yes, we wore navy pleated skirts and a navy blouse with piping, and the piping described which school you attended to. You also had on your left arm, you had like a heart shaped with the colors and the number of the school, so you could tell which school you attended to.
What were the colors of your school?
Blue. For school, when we attended school, we wore like a black uniform.
Mm-hmm.
But this was the uniform. In the summer, we were only allowed to wear a white blouse with a navy skirt, but most of the time we had to wear the uniform.
During this time, when was there first signs that you saw of changes happening? Signs of any danger or changes happening that affected your life?
I'd say the end of 34, 35, when the refugees from Germany started to come. And my father had organized a committee helping the people to make passports, provide food and shelter for them while they were in Vilna. Because there they started, not in a great amounts, but they were coming pretty often. They started running from Germany already then. I'd say 34, 35.
Did you notice any changes in where the family could shop, or any changes in school when you went to school?
No, this didn't change.
Any changes in your father's business?
No, business was the same.
When did things change again and start to get a bit dangerous?
Well, the Germans invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939. I was in school that day, and we heard on the loudspeakers Hitler's speeches. And after that, it started immediately. It was a big city, and yet people were hungry. They used to go down with planes. If they saw people in line, they would shoot them. It wasn't Jews or non-Jews, but they were just wherever there was a gathering of people. Besides that, they had spies all over the city. We used to see a beggar by our school when we first started, the first week. And we didn't know, he looked like a beggar, and then we found out that he had mirrors in them for the Germans' plane. And they never missed with their bombs. They started throwing bombs on the city.
What was your first experience with the invading army?
Well, Vilna was changed over because they made a pact with Russia. So Vilna actually, Germany took over, and immediately after that the Russian came in. My father didn't want to stay with the Russians. So we went back to Olshan because we had homes there. So we packed up whatever we could, not much, we left everything, the furniture, most of our clothes, and we went back. Because he didn't want to stay with the Russians. Because we didn't know, it was so uncertain that we didn't know what to do, so we went back to Olshan.
Did he ever say to you why he didn't want to stay with the Russians?
Well, because my father was a businessman, and the Russians, didn't approve of any kind of business. In fact, when we came to Olshan, while the Russians occupied, we had sacks in us in case they come and take us to Siberia, because a lot of people were taken to Siberia at the time.
You had sacks?
Bags to prepare to take something if they come in the middle of the night to take us. So we would be prepared. In fact, my younger brother, who was very young then, he was in charge of the needles to sew it up and to have, and the bags, to have it ready. We had it in a special place, I remember, in a sofa that opened up, and we had it there just in case they would come. That's why my father didn't want to stay, and he had a hard time getting work. So did I. I went out to school, and I couldn't get any work.
Was this in Vilna or Hoshani?
In Hoshani when we came. I had tried several jobs. I worked, and they would fire me. And then I worked for a while. The post office, of all places, was they confiscated one of our homes. And their post office was there. And I worked on the telegraph at night for a while. And then I was fired there. That's when I went to Oshmiani, and I met my husband there afterwards. But I worked there. I worked in it's a Russian organization, and I worked there.
What year did you family go back to Holshani?
In 39.
In 30, right after the war started.
Right after the war,
Okay.
about a month or two after the war started. I don't remember whether it was October or November when we went back.
Hey, we need to stop now and change the tape. Thank you. We're interviewing ریבה Scope, and this is tape number 2. When we finished tape number 1, you were discussing the move of your family from Vilna back to Holshani, away from the Russians, and that it was 1939, you were out of school, and it was difficult for you to get a job. Why was it difficult?
Because my father was a businessman, and it was a small town. Everybody knew him, and someone would squeal, and I couldn't get a job. I couldn't hold a job. I worked in a few places, and I would be fired.
Why did they fire you? What was it that your father was a businessman?
Yes.
Was this town under the Russians as well?
Yes, the whole area was. The whole area was.
What kinds of jobs did you have?
I worked in the post office. I worked on the telegraph at night. And then when I moved to Oshmiani, I worked it was called the Prom Kombinat. It had 500 businesses, like mills and sawmills, flour mills. And I worked as a bookkeeper there. I was young and out of school, and I learned the Russian system, which is very different from all this that I learned in school. They have an entirely different system. It's a numerical system, and I worked there as a bookkeeper.
Who did you talk to before you decided to go to Oshmiani? Who did you discuss it with?
With my parents, and I had a cousin whom I studied Russian with because I didn't speak Russian. He was graduated from law school, a lawyer, and he couldn't speak Russian. We studied for 4 months together, and I was able to learn the language. We studied quite a bit.
And when was this? What year about?
This was beginning of 1940.
How far away was Oshmiani from Hoshani?
20 kilometers.
How did you get there?
There used to be a bus by horse and buggy, and during the war I walked there many times.
Did you have family in Oshmiana?
No, I just had a friend, my mother's a friend, that I stayed with her. In fact, I got a room to stay, and they came and they picked up my stuff. They wanted me to stay with them in their apartment. They were friends of my family.
What were their names?
Zhizhemsky,
Can you
Hirsch and Celia.
can you spell the last name?
Zhizemsky.
Can you describe Oshmiana, what it was like? How many people were in the town?
That was the county seat. It was a bigger city. And it was a nice city. It was much larger than, and this was the county seat.
And how old were you when you went to Oshmiana?
When I went to Oshmiani, I was 19.
Can you talk about what you did in terms of your outside your job?
Well, I had some friends. I made some friends. And it wasn't long I met my husband. And I only knew him for 4 months before we were married.
How did you meet him?
A friend of mine introduced him to me. She lives now in Yardley, Pennsylvania. We were just walking, and just by coincidence, and we met.
What was your husband doing?
At that time, he wasn't working. He was helping his father in his business, but the business was closed at that time. He had just gotten back from the Polish army. He was a prisoner of war. My husband was in the defense of Warsaw. He was in the inactive duty in the Polish army, and he was taken prisoner to Germany. And then when they signed the pact with Germany, they released some from the eastern Poland. They released some of the prisoners, and they stopped him. He had to swim the Vistula, but then he returned home, and he was sick for quite a while, and then he was... So when I met him, he was just not doing much at the time. Oh, he was, wait a minute, no, he was teaching, he was a phys teacher in the schools there. Then the Russians came.
What was his name?
Lou.
And his last name?
L-U-W, Skop.
Can you talk about, describe your wedding?
I really didn't have a wedding. We had a wedding, but it wasn't a big celebration for some reason, because I couldn't even take off one day from work. So we were married in a civil ceremony on Saturday morning, and then we went back to my parents, and there we had a regular wedding with a rabbi. But it wasn't, my parents at that time lived in a 2-room apartment, and just the immediate family were there. My uncle and his family, my 2 aunts and the family, and some of close friends, a few, because it was very small.
When were you married for the first time with the civil ceremony? What year or what month?
Well, that was February 15, 1941.
Do you consider that your marriage, or you consider the one when you went back to Holsani and was married by a rabbi as your real marriage?
Well, we married that same day, at night. So that was the marriage.
And then did you come back?
Monday, I went back to work. I didn't have even one day. Monday, Sunday we came back, and Monday I went back to work.
Where did you live after you were married?
We had an apartment, 1-room apartment. I knew the people, and we had an apartment and kitchen privileges.
Can you think of, during this time, were you aware of what was going on with the war?
Yes, we knew what was going on because we were still free. And, you know, the Russians, we could do anything. We could So, and we had radios, so we knew what was going on.
Did you ever hear Hitler on the radio?
Sometimes. Sometimes. No, we had radios we could hear at that time.
And when did things change again?
Things changed very drastically on June 21st, 1941, when the Germans overtook the Russians by surprise, and they came in the middle of the night with a lot of ammunition and a lot of tanks and a lot of big army, and they overtook it. They didn't take even a prisoner. I still have the picture vivid in my mind. In Holshani, there was a river, and there were maybe 6,000 to 8,000 soldiers standing up, killed in the river. They threw them into the water. They didn't take even one prisoner. And after that, they put us in the ghetto.
What city were you living in when they put you in the ghetto?
Well, when I was married, I lived in Oshmiany. And then, before that, when the Germans came, they surrounded the city, and they took, were Jews and non-Jews alike, and they took a lot of prisoners. My husband was among them. And he had a certificate when he was freed from the German army. He had a certificate, and he showed them. So they let him go. And he came back, but at that time we didn't want to stay in Oshmiany anymore, so we went on foot to Holshani. I was pregnant, and we walked, and we did it in the middle of the night, and that's where we were in Holshani at the time.
And when was that about?
That was in 41, in July, maybe, July, August. I don't know, but it was right after the Germans came. And that's when they organized the ghetto.
In Holshani?
In Holshani, yeah. They took a certain amount of space downtown, and they put us together. There were maybe in one, like we had one room, we were our family, two families, my father and my brothers, myself, and the person that owned that house. And it was kind of tight, and they started sending us to work right away. They organized the Judenrat. They started demanding silver and gold, and every day they would come, and it was very difficult work because they made, paved roads, and it was with stone, and you had to cut the stone, and in the winter we were cindering the roads, all kinds of, they were also cutting down trees in the woods, the men, for lumber. That's where my husband and my brothers worked.
Can you describe the ghetto in Holshani?
Well,
Like how large it was?
It was not large, it was small. The area where they put the few thousand people was very, very congested and very, very small.
How did one get in and out of the ghetto?
Well, they made a fence around the whole ghetto, and there was watch, and you couldn't get in and get out.
Did anybody try to smuggle in or out?
It was difficult. It was very hard to get in and get out.
How was food obtained?
Very, very badly. Food was very scarce. They used to give us some rations, but it was very, very little.
Did you see any of your former neighbors
Yes, at that time, sure, there were people that I knew, and my friends were there.
What about
at the beginning.
What about non-Jewish people? Did any of them ever come, or?
No.
When was the ghetto established in Holshani?
In 1941. I don't remember the date exactly, but it was early after the Germans came, maybe a month later.
Did you have to wear any special identification as a Jew?
Yes, we wore the yellow star on front and back. And that's it.
Do you remember how your family got the yellow stars?
We used to make them up. They made us made from yellow cloth. I used to make them up and put them on.
Can you describe a typical day in the ghetto?
Oh, it was very difficult. The men used to go out 4 o'clock in the morning to work. And of course, they hadn't. I remember my mother scrounging to put something for them for lunch, to have something to eat. It was difficult. And they used to work very hard. I only had my husband and my 2 brothers and my father. My mother at that time didn't work, and I didn't go to work because I was pregnant, so I kept the records of the people that worked, another man and myself. You know, we kept the records and scheduling the work where they should go, whatever was demanded, you know, to supply the workers and everything.
Were you ever in any difficulty because you were pregnant? Did you have to hide it?
No, not at that time, no, at that time. I didn't go to work. Like I said, I worked from my house, and so no one saw me.
What was
So just the beginning.
the Judenrat, the group?
Right.
Was there anyone that you remember as
Oh yes, there were a few people. My father belonged to the Judenrat too.
and do you remember anyone else and their names?
Yes, I don't remember exactly, but there were quite a few people that I knew that were there. They were just, you know, taking orders from the German and just trying to do whatever they were asked.
And you were pregnant at this time.
Yes.
And when did you have your baby?
I had my son in November of 1941.
What was his name?
His name was Boruch. He was
Boruch.
named for my uncle, who was the first Jew to be killed in Holshane. He was a very prominent person, and they took him to Oshmiani, to prison, and they killed him. And my mother, remember, men couldn't go, but my mother went there and they brought the body, they smuggled it in. Couldn't do that, and he was buried in Holshane.
And your son was named after him. His name
Yes.
was can you give his whole name?
Yes, Baruch Abramovich. That was my uncle's name. And my son was named Baruch Eli Scott.
And the date again when he was born?
November 9, 1941.
And what were you doing at the time? How was life? How were conditions at the time in the
Oh,
ghetto?
it was terrible. It was terrible. It was really, you know, there was not much food, and it was very hard. The men worked so hard, and the women too. Everybody worked.
Were you on a working crew after you had the baby?
After I had the baby, shortly afterwards, they moved us to Oshmiani, to ghetto.
And when was that about?
That was in 42, beginning of 42. And then when they transferred us to that ghetto, the second day, they gathered everybody. I stayed behind with my son. And they took him to a synagogue, and they took quite a few people to a nearby place, and they killed them. And I heard the screams, and I must have fainted. I don't know what happened to me. My son was not even a year old, and I was holding him, and I found him on the floor, and he turned over a pail with water. In Europe, there was no running water, so the pail, and when the water, you know, I found myself splashed with the water, and that's when I came to, because the screams were so, you know, it just, and then I was sick for quite a while, and I didn't work. And after I got better, I was going on the road, and to Cinder in the summer we were working, cleaning the roads, and in the winter, that was my job for a while.
Did you carry cinder blocks?
Not cinder blocks, I mean we carried big things with not ashes but sand, and they used to make us carry it like 10 miles one way and 10 miles, and then we used to pick up some more and cinder it, and that's what I did.
Who guarded the ghetto? What kinds of guards? Where were they from?
Well, they had German guards, and they had inside the ghetto, they had like a Jewish police to guide inside in the Unrat.
Were there were there soldiers from any other country that guarded the ghetto that you remember?
Whatever. This was later on when they started cleaning out people. Then the people there, the local people, were helping the Germans.
But you didn't see any Ukrainian guard?
Not Ukrainians, but Lithuanians and Latvians and Estonians. That was in the Vilna ghetto. There were quite a few of them. They were worse than the Germans.
In the Oshmiana ghetto, you were sealed in? You couldn't leave?
No, if we went to work, it was, with a guard and you went to work. After a while, they needed bookkeepers. So I worked for a while as a bookkeeper in one of the organizations that supply the rations for the ghetto. There were about 5 or 6 of us that were taken from the ghetto to work there. And through this man, at that time, my husband was taken from Holshani to a camp in Lithuania called Žežmori. He and my 2 brothers. And they were there. That was a labor camp. And they were there until before they liquidated the ghetto in Oshmiany and they brought us to Vilna. They preceded us. They liquidated that camp, and some of the men and the women, they were mixed, they sent to other camps, and some they brought to the Vilna ghetto. My husband was there, and I was able, through the head of this company, he helped me. He created me in a truck, and I went into Vilna ghetto. We were still in Oshmiany, and I wanted to bring my husband back home. And someone told the police, and we went to this organization. We went out with the workers, but someone told the police, the Jewish police, about it. And they came, and my husband was hiding. So I don't know, he hit me with some kind of object. I can show you, I wear a partial in my mouth since that time. He knocked out 2 teeth for me. And I was bleeding, and I screamed from the pain. So they came and they took my husband back. And then shortly thereafter, they liquidated the ghetto in Oshmiany, and they took us to Vilna, to the ghetto.
How did you learn that you were going to be leaving the Oshmiana ghetto?
We didn't know. We didn't. I wanted to bring my husband to Oshmiany ghetto.
When
He never saw his son. In the picture that I showed you, that was one of the women. She was a photographer, and she made a picture for me, and that was the only picture that my husband had.
Where was she a photographer?
In Holshani.
In Hoshani?
Yes. She's still alive. She's in Israel now.
You were in Oshmiana in the ghetto. You were working as a bookkeeper.
Yeah, that was the last year.
Okay. And who were you living with?
With my father and my mother, my son, and my mother had taken a little girl that her parents were killed. Her father was killed before, together with my father-in-law and my brother-in-law. That was when the Germans first came in. They took about 600 Jews, and they killed them in a place called Zilonka, and no one knew where they were buried. They just dug the graves. They made them dig the graves, and they shot them, and they covered up, and no one knew where they were buried for a long time.
Was that for the people from Hoshani?
Oshmiany.
Oshmiany?
Yeah, they took them on a Saturday morning from the synagogues, and that was when they first came in. And this man was also taken, and these were the people that I lived with. And the mother was taken, and the little girl was left, and my mother took her together with us. So that's we were the 5 of us.
Do you remember the little girl's name?
Yeah, Malka. Oh, sure.
Her last name?
Zhizhemsky.
Do you know how to spell that?
Zhizhemsky. Zemsky.
And how old was she?
She was 4 at the time.
Can you describe a typical day in the Ośmiana ghetto when you were working?
Well, when I worked on the road, we used to get up at 4 o'clock and till about 6, 7 in the evening we used to work. Of course, we had very little food. The food was very scarce. They used to give us some flour, but not much. And not much of anything else.
Was there any health care from the Jewish
No,
Council?
well, they tried in ghetto to help, there were doctors that were in ghetto and so on, they helped, but there it wasn't really that much.
Did you have any, did a doctor ever see you while you were pregnant, or did you have any help when the baby was born?
I didn't have any help, and I was in labor for 29 hours. And I needed corrective work when I came to the States.
Who was with you while you were pregnant, or you were having in labor?
My mother.
Who delivered the baby?
My mother.
Was it her first grandchild?
Yes.
And you mentioned that you had to leave Ośmiana. Do you remember when they liquidated the
The
ghetto?
end of 42. The end of 42.
Were there any actions before then, major actions before
they
then?
used to come in and take people right and left, but this was the biggest action while I was there in the beginning of the creation of the ghetto, that they took so many people. My uncles and my aunts were taken then, and quite a few friends, that I knew. They really took a lot of, my parents were there too. They didn't take them, but they were there too.
How did you get from Ośmiana to Vilna?
By horse and buggy.
Did you ride?
Huh?
Did you ride in a?
Yeah,
in other words, from the ghetto?
They provided that to whoever, and they had some trucks for people to take us.
What could you take with you?
Nothing. We had nothing, and we could take whatever, just even when they first came, they gave us 10 minutes to get out from our houses to the ghetto. So in 10 minutes, you really can't take much.
What was the time of year that you left Ośmiana and went to Vilna? Remember the year or the month?
I don't remember the year of the month. I think it was in the
Was it in spring?
fall. In the fall, I think it was, when we came to Vilna, because I remember we were given a place where there was a store that was all empty. It was no windows and everything, and my father tried to, and then my brothers were in Vilna. They came from that camp, so they helped, and we covered the windows, and we made, out of boards, we made some beds to sleep on. We all lived in one room, and my mother-in-law and my sister-in-law, my husband's sister and mother, stepmother, came to live with us in the same room.
And was that like 1942?
For the end of 42, beginning of 43.
End of 42.
Mm-hmm.
And in the Vilna ghetto, about how long did it take you to get from Ośmiana to Vilna?
Oh, I don't remember. It was 50 kilometers.
So a day or 2 days?
No, a couple hours.
Do you recall what anybody talked about, or what anybody was thinking during the ride from Ośmiana to Vilna? What fears people had?
We didn't know. We thought we are going, they're just going to kill us anyway. We didn't know where. They wouldn't tell us where they were taking us. They were just taking us. They told us to go, you pick up and you go. We didn't know where we were going.
When you say they, who were they?
The Germans. The Germans that were in charge.
Okay. And there in the Vilna ghetto, you were with your husband again?
Yes.
And how old was your son then?
Well, my son was then about a year and a half when we came there.
Do you recall ways that you had to provide food for your son and the family?
Well, we had very little food. I still remember in Vilna ghetto, my father and my mother, I used to exchange. One person was left at home, either myself or my mother, to take care of the two children. We were allowed that, just one person to a family. And I remember my father bringing in a thin, skinny in his sack, a little carrot. And my mother would sneak in just one little tiny carrot for the children. We had very little food all through the years. We had very little food.
And what kind of work did you do in Vilna?
I worked in the gardens in a hospital to take care of the gardens. My father and my mother. And I used to exchange her and do that too. We worked pretty hard. It was big gardens, you know. This belonged to a big hospital.
Was it inside the ghetto or outside the ghetto?
Oh, outside the ghetto. All the work. We used to go out starting already at 3:30. Used to go out. The workers would go out. We had all the patches, the Star of David, the yellow, and we would go in groups with an escort. And we would go out and then come in the ghetto too the same way.
We need to stop now and change the tape. Thank you. With Riva Skop, and it is tape number 3. At the end of tape number 2, we were talking about life in the Vilna ghetto, and the fact that you were working while you were in the ghetto. Can you talk a little bit in the ghetto about, were you knowledgeable of any underground or resistance activities in the ghetto?
Not in the beginning, because, you know, we were so absorbed because they used to come to the ghetto, surround the ghetto every so often and take out people, that we had to dig places where to hide. A few times I went down with my baby, 3 stories underground on a rope, you know, to hide. And people tried to make some hiding places because they used to come and take people right and left. It became very Vilna ghetto. They were really bad. And then they also, I don't remember exactly the date, but it was in 43. They surrounded the ghetto once with tanks and everything, and they were looking for one of the leaders in the ghetto, who they suspected, you know, they were going out. And it was a writer who lives now in Israel. His name is Abraham Sutzkever. And he's still alive. And they wanted him. And of course, they used to come and take 1,500 people. That was nothing. They made everyone go out, and they take them. In Vilna, we had a place where they used to shoot them called Ponari. And that's where they took him. But he was hiding out, and a Polish woman helped him dress as a woman. I have a picture in my encyclopedia. He's dressed as a woman, and he went out through her attic. And but at that time, when they didn't find him, so they took a couple thousand people, and they punished the whole ghetto. And that's what they used to do. They were beasts. It's unthinkable what they did to us. Unthinkable.
How did they punish the ghetto?
They punished the ghetto by taking out people and killing them.
Did people know when people were taken out where they were going?
They had an idea. They had an idea where they were going. They used to put them in black trucks without windows, and that's what it was. We knew. And sometimes they would kill them just like that. They put them up to the wall and just for no reason in the world. A human life, a Jewish life had no worth at all.
Were you aware at any time while you were in the ghetto of the resistance or any underground activities?
We started hearing things, but we didn't, because we didn't have that many radios or anything. You know, some people we still had a radio here or there, so we'd hear some things, but it wasn't really that we could listen to the. Besides, we were all working. Most of us, you know, we were enslaved to work. You couldn't. We didn't have that much time. By the time we got home, we were finished from a whole day, and this was day in, day out.
And where was the main place that you worked?
Mostly I worked in the hospital. I used to change with my mother. Either I stayed home and she went, or I went and she stayed home with the kids, because the kids were both two young kids.
Did you have any identity card?
I don't think so. I don't think, they used to keep records of us, you know, the names and everything. We were registered, but we didn't have any cards.
When you had to leave the ghetto or come back, you didn't have to show
We always
anything?
left in groups with a guide. We always left in groups. You know, someone that took us there and brought us back.
Do you remember any instances when you were working in the garden of any contact that you had with people outside the ghetto?
Not too many people. Not too many people. They were, you know, people were staying away most of the time.
Physically, how were you feeling at this time?
Well, physically I was young, and at that time I was healthy. And, you know, when you are young and healthy, you can withstand all this. Of course, we were all skinny, but because we didn't have enough, we didn't have what to eat, but I was young, and so was my husband, and so were my brothers. They were very young, and they were very healthy. And, you know, so you do.
What kind of work did your husband do?
He worked in the Zatlerai that makes covers for machinery, the seat covers. That's what he did.
Okay. And how did things gradually change in the ghetto?
Well, the ghetto, you know, the ghetto went on like that we weren't even that just for the certain time. And then we went out, they took us to the labor camp. I didn't want to separate with my parents. And my father told me that everybody, the whole family is going, that they were looking for young people to go to work somewhere. We didn't know where or what, but just that my father had a friend there was someone that was organizing, you know, the work and scheduling. So he told him about it. And my father had assured me that we are all going, but then when they put us on the trucks to go, he told me he's not going, that he wanted me to go, hoping that maybe someone will survive. So they took us to the camp, and when they brought us there, they separated. They took my husband to another camp, and they brought us. They were called the cheap housing in Vilna. It was on Subach Street. And they were 6-story buildings, no facilities, no water, no nothing. And to go for water, we used to go with two guides, German, with the SS. And they would 2 kilometers would carry water back to bring it. And then the facilities were, you know, in the outhouse down in the hall. And when they brought us to that was the right away they took the men, some of the men away to a different camp. And the next morning, to scare us and to show us, you know, they hung a couple. They made us all go out at 6 in the morning. This was a couple that also came from ghetto, and they had they had a 10-year-old daughter, and they tried to leave her with some Polish people, and they caught them. So everybody had to go out, and we had to look, and that was the first initiation into the camp, and they hung them.
Did they hang the parents and the child?
Not the child was watching. And they just hung the mother and the father. And then we started working there. My husband wasn't with me. For a while I didn't even know where they took him. And I worked in the Schneiderstube, which is as the sewing house. They used to bring from the front the clothing of the soldiers with lice and with blood. It was cleaned afterwards, and we had to repair it. And then they would take it after it was repaired. In fact, the man that was our grocer in Vilna before the war was in charge of the Schneiderstube where we worked. And I used to leave my child, we lived, you see this little, my laundry room? There were 8 of us in it. And I had my neighbor that, where we slept, that was just boards, They slept across, she had her husband and a mother-in-law and another family. But she used to take care of my son. And my son was trained when she would be he knew which German was a good German and which was from the SS. It was from the company that we worked for. They drove different cars. And at the age of 2.5, he used to tell us which car came in through the gates. And it was pretty rough because we didn't have what to eat. And, it was really, and on top of it, there used to come the head of the Gestapo that was in charge of our camp. The name was Ernest Weiss. And he used to come every day, every other day. In the beginning, we were about 2,500 people. So then when they took the men, about 500 men, so we were left maybe about 2,000, 1,800 men and women still. But he used to come every other day, every day with a black, and everybody would go out to the appel, they called it, and he would motion this, this, this. And it got to a point where I used to stay up front with my child. I wanted to go already. It was so hard, and I lost my parents. I didn't know what happened to them. And I had no one, my brothers, no one. So, and he never took me. He took others, the elderly mostly. He would pick out. But it was a terrible thing to watch every day, and he would take them on Ponari and probably have fun shooting them or whatever they did. And Ponari was a place that not only did they do to the local Jews, but when we worked and my brothers worked on the railway, and they used to stop with the trains, and they used to ask, where is Ponari? We are going there to be resettled. They didn't know that in 30 or to 45 minutes, they would be resettled forever. These were Jews from Czechoslovakia, from Hungary, from Romania. And that were a cemetery where they killed them. They made them dig their own graves. They had special details that used to kill them. And that was the end. And this was until one morning they surrounded the camp in March of 43. And we all went out. And that's when they took the children. And I wanted to go with my son. I didn't care what did I have to live for anymore. But I was hit with a machine gun over my head. And I don't know, I was for about 3 days I was unconscious. I didn't know what happened to me. After 3 days, I don't know how long, someone brought me up to the room, and there was a doctor, a Jewish doctor that I knew from the ghetto yet. And our parents knew each other. And he was sitting there with me. And of course, this was the end for me. And then, several weeks later, he smuggled my husband in because he used to take care on the other camp too. He could have lost his life without any question, but he felt sorry for me, and he brought him in. Of course, my husband was also very heartbroken and sick about it. And after that, my life was finished anyway. I didn't care if they shoot me or whatever. I didn't. I went down, I must have weighed about 65, 64 pounds. And it didn't matter, but my husband went back to work there in camp. And this was and we were there still for another, till 1944 in that camp.
Did you find out whatever happened to your
No.
son?
This was, took all the children away from all the camps the same day. From the corner, from all the camps. It was like a mess that they took all the children away.
After this happened, did you have anybody to talk to about it?
Oh, it was very difficult. How can you talk? What can you talk about? I was young. My son was my only thing that kept me alive. Well, my husband was away all these years. So when my husband came back, and I was in very, very bad shape after that, and I didn't go to work anymore. I didn't care. I just didn't care. And then this went on till early in May or June of 44, where they, we had some news. The men that worked, had made some little for the radios, not sophisticated, but they could get, some were mechanics, and so we knew approximately where the Germans were coming. And they were about around Minsk at that time. They were pushed back. And it was a Saturday night. They surrounded the camp with tanks and with SS. And someone found a place where they said, I didn't know about it, but they found a place where you could jump. And I heard my husband, and I didn't want to stay in my husband's way because I was physically in no condition to go. But my husband and another friend of his that worked with him together, he told him that he must find, I hid from him. But I heard him, he said that if he doesn't find me, he's not going. He wanted to try her to go out too. But he said that if he doesn't find me, he's not going. So I went out. And he practically carried me out on his back. And you had to jump like, or maybe 8-10 feet from a small window in a wall. That was the place where they worked. And outside was barbed wire and a potato field. And all of maybe 7 people went out. And then they caught the Germans. Already when we went out and my husband dropped me, they were shooting. And I had already, I had a shrapnel or something that hit me. So my husband carried me on his back. And where do you go? Where do you go when you don't know? When you were away from in the city, and besides it was strange. So we found a place that was burned down. And we hid there in the basement. And my husband went out. And the people that owned it worked in a brewery, so they were used to people come in to buy beer from them. And my husband, they didn't know. He tore off his, and then my husband told them the truth. But they didn't squeal because a lot of them would have. So, and we stayed there till it got dark, and we went out. My husband and this other man and myself. And when we went out from there, we were hiding in the woods for a couple of weeks.
And what year was this?
This was in 44.
What was the season?
In the summer. In the summer, it was June. And you saw the dress that I showed you, I wear that, and I still had some shoes, but my feet were roped, so we had to leave them. So I was barefoot. And while we were in the woods, my husband with a manicure scissor, cut off my hair, because you couldn't wash it or nothing. So he cut it off. And I just had a piece of white schmatter that I put on my head, and that's how we walked around. And we came back like that. And it was very dangerous, because there were all kinds of partisans, but they were Russians, and they were Polish, and they were black, and they were, not black, but they called them the black and the white and the red, and some of them didn't like Jews either. So it was very, very bad.
Did you meet any of the partisans?
Oh, we talked to some of them. We tried to stay away from them. And we were hungry. We had nothing to eat. So until we got to Holshani, back. And there we went to a man that I knew my father knew. He had a small estate. And I thought he was a Polish gentleman. And I thought, no matter, maybe he won't help me, but he wouldn't hurt me either. I had a lot of confidence in him. And the three of us came there. And what I saw is indescribable. He was with the Polish underground. And 2 days before we came there, they came at night, the Germans, and they killed him and his wife and his 2 children. And they killed all his cattle and the chickens. They didn't take nothing. They just killed everything. And they opened all the pillows, and everything was outside. So when we saw that, where do you go from there? Where do you go from there? And I remember the area because a lot of people from the surrounding areas worked for my father. So we went to another village, and we told them a different story, that we are going with the Germans. We are running from the Russians. Would they let us stay? But they were very poor people. They didn't recognize me. They didn't. Because I looked at that time like maybe I was 80. So they didn't recognize me, and we both spoke Polish perfectly. The other man had an accent in Polish, but so we used to tell him to keep quiet. But and they didn't have. They were very poor themselves, but they let us stay. And they had a place, it's called Ziemlianka in Polish, where they used to keep their potatoes for the season, when they harvest it, and then they put it into the ground, and that's by there. And they had a well. So we used to eat the sour grass, shav, did you ever hear? That's what we used to eat, and we drink water. And we stayed there, and at night I used to pray with them, because in school, it was a Catholic school, and every day in the morning, we didn't pray, but we heard our friends, 600 girls would lay down in the hall on their knees and they would pray, so I learned the prayers. And I would pray with them at night, together for the prayers, and we'd sleep outside. It was in the summer. So we stayed there for, it was almost 2 weeks. And then we told them that we're going to start going. And one night, it was on a Thursday. A German tank stopped, and 3 officers went out. I was in the house with the 2 other women, and they brought in flour and butter and sugar, and they asked us to make them bread. And we baked for them, and they took it, and they left. They were clean-shaven, they were dressed. This was on a Thursday. Friday, in the afternoon, we saw little umbrellas in the sky. In the afternoon, we didn't know what it meant. But we saw, it's such a view, little umbrellas coming down in the forests, in the woods, in the fields. With nothing, no noise, just could see the parachutists coming down. And that night the Katyushas started to work, the Russian Katyushas. The Russians were pushing the Germans. And during the night, we were laying there on the floor, the 2 men and myself, and I woke my husband. Must have been about 3 o'clock. I don't know. It was getting a little bit light. And I said, "Do you hear? I heard Russian swear words." And it was, so my husband said, "You are dreaming." go back to sleep. So I lay down, and then I hear again, loud. This was not too far from the main road. So then my husband, I woke him up again, and I told him. So we walked to the road, and they were grouping around the well, and they were 14-year-old boys. They didn't even have guns. They had little German shovels, the small ones. And that's all they ask is vody, vody, vody. That means water. So my husband and I started bringing up the water, and with a ladle that was there, we'd give them young kids. And we couldn't believe it, that these were the kids that were pushing the German army. Because the Russians had lost a lot of men too. And these were young kids that were pushing them, in the infantry.
Did you see any tanks?
No, we didn't see any tanks. We just saw, and then they started coming with trucks. They didn't even have tanks at that time.
As you looked around the countryside from the view that you had, as the Germans were retreating, did you notice that anything was burning?
We didn't see any Germans retreating. They probably went during the night. We didn't see any.
Did you see anything burning?
Oh, during the night before, all the woods where the Katyushas were going, and oh, it was terrible. This was burning, the fires all around. And that's how the Russians came back. So the man that was with us, he was from Vilna. He asked the Russian truck, and they took him back. Where we wanted to stay there. We had nowhere to go. And we came back and we wandered around. And people thought there was a young Jewish doctor before, who is still in Israel. Then we went to a man that worked for my father, and he had a lot of things that my mother had given him, to save. And I didn't like what I heard them say. And during the night I said to my husband, we better not stay here, because they'll kill us. They want to keep the things. And things didn't mean a thing to me. So we left.
What kind of things did your mother give him? Do you know?
She left, say, silver, a sewing machine, clothing, linens. My stuff, I gave it to a young doctor in Oshmiani. Because, my mother had given me things. And when I came, and he had a sister, a doctor in Holshani. That was when we came back. And she had saved my husband's life, because my husband developed an infection in his leg, and it was going up to his thigh. So we went there, she gave him an injection, she saved his life. And then a couple of days later, we asked her if there are any things, because I left some of my things. She said she doesn't know anything because her brother wasn't there, which I can't blame her, maybe she didn't know. So we stayed there, and then we walked to Oshmiani, because, we were hungry, we were exhausted, we were naked. That shmata dress that you saw, that's what I was wearing, barefoot, with a little babushka on my head. So we came, and we have nothing. We have no money, nothing, no documents, nothing. So my husband was mobilized right into the Russian army. They were looking for men. I went to look for a job in a bank.
What year was this?
44.
Spring, fall, summer?
44. 44 in July, August. And I went in, and there was a Russian director of the bank, and I told him that I worked in this town, and people should know me, the beginning of the war. And I said, the woman that cleans the bank is dressed better than I am, but I just came from a camp, and I have nothing. So he asked around, and when I came back, he said, the head bookkeeper is taken, but would I work as an assistant head bookkeeper? Fine. So I started working there, and my husband worked as a phys ed, and he got out of the army, from the Russian army.
We have to stop and change the tape. Thank you. 4. When we were finishing tape number 3, you were discussing your husband and you returned to Ośmiana in Poland, and that you had gotten a job in a bank, and your husband was a gym teacher, a phys ed teacher. Can you describe how you looked at that time after being in the ghettos?
Well, when I came into the bank, I was barefoot. I didn't have shoes. I was wearing an old, very, very old dress. That's all I had. I was wearing a babushka on my head because my hair was, and that year my hands froze. And I had bandaged hands because there was no penicillin or anything at that time. So I was, and in Russia you shake hands, but I couldn't shake because I used to wear gloves many times because my hands were a mess with wounds. They wouldn't heal. And a woman there once asked my husband, how can you live with an 80-year-old grandmother? And I was only 24. And that's how I looked. I did my work. I worked very hard. And until I started to faint in the bank, I couldn't work. Because I worked pretty hard because I took over as head bookkeeper because they arrested the bookkeeper. He owned the bank, this man, very nice man, had an estate. So they confiscated his estate and they put him in for something very minor, for 15 years.
Who arrested him?
The Russians.
So Hosniana was under the Russians at this time.
Oh yes, this was Ośmiana. And the whole
Ośmiana.
area was under the Russians. So they came, a controller. It was over nothing. He used to drink occasionally, from despair. And I used to remind him many times because I did the work. And I was very fond of him. My father knew him, very nice man. So I asked him, but he did favors and he can't do that. And they arrested him. So I took over. But after a while, I started fainting. And one time they had to take me to the hospital. I couldn't, I fainted out and they took me to the hospital. And a consilium of 7 Russian doctors in the hospital told my husband that I'm finished. They can give me a time. And if there would be a miracle, if I could conceive a baby, maybe. But it's impossible, they told him. I was in very bad physical shape. I was, we came back, how long can you go on? No food, no nothing. And it was a rough time. And then someone came to the bank with a letter from my brother. My brother he came to my wedding in 41. I was 14 years old. And because he worked already, and he was very bright, and the Russians sent him to a school in Kiev, an accounting school. And we didn't know what happened. My father often, always said that at least he would stay alive, but we didn't know. And this man was a mayor of a small town, Brother Leather. And it was addressed to anyone because people knew my father, and he brought me that letter. And it was from it's called Polevaya Pochta. That means he was in the army, and it was a post number. And I wrote him one letter, and I didn't hear anything. And what I showed you before, that was the second letter that I wrote to him, hoping that he would get it. By that time, he had volunteered. They took him to way in Tashkent from his school. And he came to Minsk where I had an aunt, and she gave him 100 rubles, and they took him all the way to Tashkent. And there, he volunteered into the Russian army. They wouldn't take him as a Polish citizen. So he told them that he was from the White Russia, from Belarus. And they took him, they sent him to officer schools, and he was training recruits. But he decided he wants to go and fight. So he volunteered. He was a mine-throwing officer. With the infantry, they go and clear the grounds for the infantry. And then I got a letter from him, that he got my letter, and we started to correspond with each other. And to me, that was like everything returned.
Which brother was this? What was
The
his
youngest, Zimo, the one that's in Israel. So it was for a couple of months, not often, maybe once a month, and then it stopped. Like nothing. Well, there were 2 division stations that I used to service in the bank, and I knew the head of the divisions, and they always, in the bank, they'd come for money. I always tried to be nice and helpful and fill out their documents and everything, and they always said, is there anything they can do for me? But I didn't want anything from them, but then I called them, and they tried to find out what happened, but they didn't know. They didn't know what happened to him at all. They said that he's not listed dead, he's not listed missing, and they didn't know. And this was another tragedy. Here I had a brother, and here nothing. So about 6 months later, I had a letter from Bucharest, from Romania, written not by my brother, but by another Russian officer, that my brother is wounded. He had a concussion of the brain and he couldn't see. And he had lost both his legs. So he was his eyes, and so he wrote the letter to me, and they were taking them to Baku, at the Crimean Sea in Russia. And my brother was there for 11 months in the hospital. I couldn't go to see him because I was a Polish citizen, so I didn't have a right to go to Russia. So, and then after 11 months he returned. He came. I came once from work, and I see an officer, a handsome, tall, was a young kid when he left. And this brother was very short as a baby. But when he came to my wedding, he also wore a uniform. He was in gymnasia, and his sleeves were up to halfway, and the pants were like shorts, because you couldn't buy clothes during the war. But here I saw a handsome young officer sitting, and I didn't recognize him. So we stayed, I worked, my husband, we stayed in Oshmiany, and he used to go back to Vilna. He'd get a job in an apartment, and then, he would come back, go for a couple of days, he'd lose the apartment, he'd lose his job, and that went on for a while, and that's when we decided to move back to Vilna. And we started there, my husband started to work, and
What year was this about?
this was 45, because the war was still, my brother was still in the war. The war ended in 45, so this was before, this was when the war ended. And then when we all moved to Vilna, and I got pregnant with my daughter there. And my daughter was born in May of 46. And after that, we started thinking about not wanting to raise a child in Russia. But my brother needed medical attention. So, and it was very hard for me to even the thought to part with him.
Had he regained his sight?
Oh yes, they cured. He suffers still now with headaches, but he regained his sight. You can see on his face, on the pictures too that I showed you, that his mouth is still crooked, from the, but he regained, but he suffered with headaches all these years. But he used to, while he lived there in Vilna, I left, but he used to go there and I was very, very, that was a tragedy for me to part with my brother. But he had to go there they used to take him once a year to a hospital for a whole month, and, they really took very good care on their veterans. And he remained there, and I left, because I had a cousin, a doctor from Minsk, had the same name as I, and her husband was a doctor. He was in the Russian army, and they both came and made sure they put me on the train They wanted someone to get out from Russia. They didn't want us to stay. And she was a great influence on me, unfortunately. She died in 1967.
What was her name?
Also Riva. Riva Kugel. I have a picture of her too, I can show you.
How did your, what was your husband's reaction to wanting to leave Oshmiana?
Oh, my husband wanted to leave. My husband wanted to leave. He wanted to leave. And it was difficult to get out, but they had evacuation committee. The Polish government had an agreement because they knew that eventually Russia will annex that part of Poland. See, they gave it to Lithuania now. So they made an agreement that they annexed a part of Germany, and that's where they resettled the Polish people from our area. So, and there was the woman that when I still worked in the bank, I used to, try to help her to get the money, because the Russian director he hated Jews, he hated Poles, he hated everybody. And she was a very nice person, she helped people that were giving away their homes and their lives, going back on the other side of Poland to start a new life. Why not help her? So I did, and before she left, she took she took the information and she brought me as a gift the papers for my husband and I, and thanks to her we were able to, it was difficult already because we let him lapse, but we were still able to go out. And of course my biggest tragedy was the day when I had to part with my brother. And we went on, we lived in Lodz, Poland, for a year, and we wanted to go to Israel. And I tried to make contact with the Israelis. I went to the mountains in Poland where they used to, because there was no Israel then, it was illegal. And I even brought my child with me. She was a year old, but they wouldn't take children because they had to cross the borders at night into Austria, into Italy. So they wouldn't take me, and we just didn't know what to do. We couldn't go. We couldn't go legally, and we couldn't go illegally. There was no such a thing as legal migration at that time in '47. So and I had a big family here in America, and they were wonderful. My father's sisters and brothers. My grandmother had died in '41. And they decided that we should try to go to Paris, because on the Polish quota there were no way we could go out. So we went to Paris, and from there we were able to we stayed 2 years in Paris, and we waited for a visa, and then we were able to come to the United States.
What agency helped you in Paris?
The Joint Distribution Committee. And we had a very good friend who worked with he was the cultural director, should he rest in peace. He was very helpful to us. His wife still lives in New York. I keep in touch with her. His name was Dr. Judah Shapiro. He helped us a great deal because, in Paris you can't work. If you're not a citizen, you can't have a labor permit. You can't work. And it's very difficult. We didn't have money. And we had a child. And what do you do? So my husband worked illegally, just to bring home to the room where we worked. He used to make leather coats. He learned that in Lodz. So I used to bring the goods and the subway, and that's how, because I didn't want to ask my family, for help until we came here. And when we came here, we stayed in New York with an aunt for 5 days, came by boat. In November, we came to Nova Scotia, and then by train through Canada, and I met a nun in Montreal that spoke Polish, and I wrote an English telegram to my family, and my whole family came to New York to greet us.
If we could go back a little bit, when you were in Paris, when did you leave for the United States? Remember the date
In
or the?
November of 1949.
Do you remember the name of the ship?
Yeah, the Aquitania. It's no longer in service, but that was a very big from the Conrad line. I never saw the ship until it docked in. I was sick all the time until it docked in in Nova Scotia. Thank God my husband was able to take care of my child.
How
It
long
was
was
very stormy. It took us 10 days. Yeah. Normally it was 7 days, but there was an accident. A boat was on fire, so they turned around and they helped. And I never, it was a beautiful, beautiful ship according to my husband, but I never saw it.
And when did you arrive in the United States?
We arrived we came here on the 3rd of November, and we stayed 5 days in New York with my aunt and uncle. And then a friend of ours was going to Freeland, Pennsylvania, where I had another uncle and cousins. And he brought us to Pennsylvania. That was on a Monday, it was election day. And on Wednesday, my husband went to work. And Friday, he brought $20 check. And that's how we started. My husband worked, I had a child, I couldn't. So we rented, after a while, we rented a bigger house, and I started a business in my home. Used to sell remnants. Had no idea how to do it, what to do, but I learned. I didn't know how to sew. I knew how to embroider, but I didn't know how to make anything or sew. And I had customers. He was a designer in Hazleton, Pennsylvania. And after a while, I took lessons from him. And they were professional dressmakers. And when we graduated, he said the only one he would trust with the handwork was me. But I learned how to sew and used to make a lot of things for my girls. When my daughter went away to college, the only thing I bought for her is some sweaters and a coat. The rest I made everything for her. And that's what I did it in my house, and I developed a clientele from even Philadelphia used to come, people, relatives, and they used to tell me, they trusted me, because everything I suggested always came out better than what they picked. And they were remnants. It wasn't, then I started handling, and my other daughter was born, and I did it in my house. Because I didn't have furniture for the house, so it was fine. I had 2 rooms, that was the business, and I worked after 1 o'clock. And then I had a schoolgirl that used to come after school, so I could be in, and that's how I started too, to help my husband. We wanted to, the biggest thing was to get a car, so we could be American.
What are the names of your 2 children?
Grace and Elisa.
And when was Grace born?
Grace was born May 8, 1946.
And where was she born?
In Vilno.
And your second child?
Her name is Elisa.
Elisa?
Elisa, we call her Lisa. She was born in Hazleton in 1952, March 28.
Do you have any grandchildren?
Yes. Grace is married. She has 2 sons, Adam and Michael.
How old are they now?
Adam is going to be 26, and Michael is 23. That's just 23 in October.
If we could go back a bit, while you were being successful with your remnant business, what was the business that your husband was in?
My husband worked for my uncle in the factory, managed the factory for me.
What kinds of things did they
They
manufacture?
manufactured men's clothing, shirts, jackets, for Botany, for McGregor. My uncle had 3 factories. He's not my uncle, and he had 2 sons and a son-in-law. And my husband worked in one of the factories.
Since you left, have you ever learned what happened to your family?
You mean my father?
Your family in Poland?
Well, my father was taken from the Vilna ghetto to Estonia. And he was there not too long. But they used to make wooden piers with logs, and they were half alive when they burned them in Kluga, Estonia.
When you say can you say what they did to them again?
They used to beat them
They,
and then put them on the piers and burn them, half alive. I know because there are people that were there, and they told me. My mother died in Ponari. When they liquidated, after they took us to the HKP, to the labor camp, they liquidated the ghetto. And they took a lot of people that went to camps. My mother probably was still young enough to be in our camp, but she had a child that she took care of. And so they took her on Ponari. My mother-in-law went to Ponari. My sister-in-law went on to Stutthof. And my two brothers were taken near Dachau to Schemberg, where they worked. There were munitions factories where they worked. Now, the first time I was there, the factories were still there and the barracks were still there. The second time I went to Germany, there is nothing left there, and they flattened that completely. In the beginning, when my brother discovered that from Israel, he went 17 times before he discovered in Dachau the documents that I showed you, and then he went to Schemberg with his wife, and he went a whole day there. And no one, they said, there is no such a thing that exists here. Nothing ever happened. And finally it was getting dark. And he stopped in the last house in the village. And an old woman said, oh yes, the Friedenhof, that's what that cemetery is called. If you'll take me and bring me back, I'll show you. Just a mile, 2 miles out, 2 kilometers out of the town. And he discovered, and of course he was very upset, that his brothers were laying in a mass grave with wooden crosses with wine. But then he brought the matzeva with him it's an aluminum matzeva. The last time I was there, it was still standing, and we were both very touched because someone put even candles in front of it. And my brother had called me from Germany to ask me if he was so deeply touched that some strange people would do it. Till this day, we don't know who. He said, do you have memorial candles? I said, sure, I have so many dates to remember. And I brought, and every day we used to go. I'll show you, I have it on the pictures. And we used to bring candles with us. And it's a small, there are people buried there, prisoners from all over Europe.
From during the war?
From right during the war, yes, because they had in Dachau, they had a lot of Russian prisoners. And from Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, France. In fact, the last time when I was there to the cemetery in '92, there was a couple from Paris that had a brother there that came to visit his grave. And the Jews they were buried on the other side of the road. Then they took the remains in the mass grave and they brought them over. And the Jewish Gemeinde, which is the organization in Berlin, made a monument for the 780 Jews from Vilna, the last. And most of them were all young people in their 20s. And that's where they are buried, in that cemetery. And at first they had a caretaker, and now the caretaker is gone, the house is gone, there is nothing. The cemetery is there because people come, that have relatives there, but everything is camouflaged. You can't even see that there was ever factories or anything.
Is there any marker for your family there? Is there any marker for your family?
Well, the only thing that my brother brought the marker from Israel for the two brothers with their names on it.
Have you
And-
ever been back to your hometown?
No. No,
You never went?
no. Maybe if I would be in better health, I would probably, I don't know if I would want to go because it was, after the war, I was there only once. And when I walked through there, I just walked out. It was too difficult to see it. But a lot of my friends went there from Israel. And they took pictures and everything, but I, I, I don't know, I would have mixed feelings because there is nothing left. My husband's father was also killed, one of the first in Oshmiana, and his brother in 41 yet, when the Germans first came. They surrounded them on a Saturday and took all the Jews, and like I said, they killed them in a non-marked grave. And my sister-in-law who went through the camps, she died in Israel. She lived in America. She came on the first boat with survivors from Frankfurt, Germany. And she had met her future husband on this, but he went to Israel. And at that time it was still illegal. He was shot at and he ended up in a hospital. And she was here, but then when she went to, and she married him. He died in 1967 during the war. And she died in 92.
Looking back over your experiences in the Holocaust and during the war, what do you believe were the major reasons you survived?
I don't know. To me it was a miracle because my husband carried me out. But to give you a reason, I really can't. It was just, I don't know what you would call it. There were so few of us. In fact, the last camp where we were, there were 2,000 people there. I found out from an Israeli who was visiting me by coincidence. They live now in East Meadow, New York. He was the one with the partisans, and he helped bury the corpses. They shot each and every one of the people in the last camp in Vilna. And he was the one, and he told me that. I didn't know what happened. I didn't know what they did with them, but they didn't even, they just called them out, and they shot them, and they left the bodies there.
When you say the camps, what do you mean by the camps? The work camps?
The war camp, the last camp in Vilna that was left, the HKP.
Was that where you escaped from
Yes,
and into the woods?
yes.
From your experiences in the war and surviving, we need to stop and change the tape now. And this is tape number 5. From your experiences in the Holocaust, have you ever had an opportunity to share any of those experiences with your family or people in the community?
Well, for a long time I didn't, because when we first came to the United States, it was a taboo subject, sort of. No one wanted to talk about it. It happened to me because my name was Riva, not because I was a Jew. And no one wanted to talk about it. And everybody looked kind of funny. I learned that because my aunt in Freeland asked me once a question, what happened to her family. And I told her the ones that I knew what happened. And then the next day she said to me, I couldn't sleep the whole night. You made me think. So I came home and I told my husband, we're not going to talk about it anymore. And to a point where someone from Israel came here, a doctor that I knew, his youngest brother was a friend of mine, we went to school together, and his family was killed. His father was a very prominent lawyer. They were 5 brothers, and he's the only one that survived in the woods. He went out after between Polshani ghetto and Oshmiani, he went into the woods. So he told, my cousins what happened, and there was a big massacre in 42 in a town called Volozhin, where a cousin of mine died, and our rabbi was killed. They took him from Polshani, to Volozhin, telling them they're going to resettle them, and then they murdered every single one of them. So he told them the story, and other things, and my cousin said to me, "Aren't you lucky, Riva, you never went through what Aaron went through?" I said, "Yes, I am," because I never talked about it. I tried to stay away even from my children until they were older. The only time when I told my children really what happened is Grace must have been 9, and Lisa was about 3, maybe a little older. I don't remember. When Eichmann's trial went on.
Eichmann's trial?
Yes,
And
in Israel, and it was televised. I sat them down. It was cruel, but it was better than me telling them things. It was introducing them to something that they can hear from someone else. And that was really the first time when they really got introduced. I didn't want my children to grow up with bitterness in their heart. I wanted them to grow up normal. I felt I got enough bitterness for an army. And I didn't want them, I wanted them to be normal human beings. Because, children are very influential. They get influenced by things. And I didn't want that. Of course, they learned as they got older. They studied it and everything. But when they were young, I didn't want to do that.
what about your grandchildren? Do they know about it?
Yes, they do. Yes, I talked to them about it. And my daughter did, and they learned in school. They learned in school. Oh, yes, I wanted them to know, definitely. They have to know.
What about in sharing with the community? Have you ever shared, done speaking engagements with the community?
After my husband died.
And when was that?
My husband died in 79, January 16, 79. And our rabbi, who was very fond of, was wonderful when my husband was sick. My husband was sick for a long time, and he was really wonderful to me. Called me and asked me. He was teaching the Holocaust in 2 Catholic universities here in Scranton, the Marywood College and the University of Scranton, who's a Jesuit college. If I would speak to his students. So at first I just said I couldn't do it. But then he was persistent, and I started working with his students. And I worked for a number of years, especially when I retired. I had more time, and I used to work with the students. I also worked with, he used to teach also on the Holocaust in a Polish national seminary for priests. I worked with them. I also spoke at the Baptist College, and we have now in Marywood College every year we have a symposium that we invite children from high schools from all around. And I didn't work the last 2 years because I wasn't feeling well, but until this time every year we used to bring survivors, we used to bring speakers. In fact, I have a book of a Polish woman. Her name is Irina Dyke, who rescued 12 Jews. She kept them in a basement. She worked for a German officer. And she spoke at one of the symposiums, but we all worked with the students, and this is continued.
On the basis of your experiences in the Holocaust, can you give any advice to any people, any future generations?
Who am I to give advice? It's very difficult, you see. It's very difficult. People should learn about it and know the reasons why it happened. And because you have to understand that Europe was always a very anti-Semitic place in the countries. It started with Spain and in Russia, and all through the years Jews were persecuted, all through the years. Even in the years when I was growing up, until Hitler came, it was pretty fairly. I know my father was very well liked. He employed a lot of people. We had a lot of friends. But still, underneath it all, there was something always coming up. And especially in the 30s, and I was growing up, it was pretty bad because the poison spread. And this is, look, we have neo-Nazis in here. We have things happening. We had a thing happen in just now. He's a neo-Nazi here in Susquehanna County, in Montrose, in Pennsylvania. He killed two black people in down south. I mean, it's still there, the hatred, you know.
Would you give any advice to people in terms of your own experience and survival?
You mean?
In other words, from your own experience and your survival, would you have any advice, for example, for your grandchildren?
I just want my grandchildren, they are fortunate to grow up in America, and I want them to grow up to be good people, and that's all I want from them, and be happy.
Okay. Thank you very much. Can you tell who is in this picture?
This is my great-grandfather and my great-grandmother on my mother's side.
What are their names?
Name was Riva and Abraham Kozlovsky.
Do you know the year this picture was taken about?
No, I have no idea.
Or where it was taken?
It was taken in Holszany.
In Poland?
In Poland, yes. It was taken in Poland, that I know, but I don't know the year.
And these pictures are in a book?
Yes, this picture is in a book. A book about Holszany.
Who wrote the book?
Some of the survivors in Israel wrote the book.
Thank you. Who is in these pictures?
This is my grandmother and my grandfather.
What are their names?
Chaya Kozlovsky and Yitzhak Kozlovsky.
And where do they fit in your family? Who are they?
They are my mother's parents.
Do you have any idea what year this was taken?
I imagine it would be taken in the early 20s.
And where it was taken?
In Holszany.
Thank you. Can you talk about this picture?
Yes, this is my father's mother. This was taken in America. She migrated to America in 1921 with 9 of her children. My father and another brother remained in Europe. I don't have a picture of my grandfather. He died very young.
What's her name?
Abrmowitz.
And about what year was this taken?
39 or 40. She died in 1941.
What city was it taken in?
New York or Baltimore. I'm not sure.
Thank you. Can you describe these pictures?
Yes, this is pictures taken in 1917 or 18. One is my mother and three of her sisters.
Can you give the names of the people beginning from the left?
Yes, that's Fruma, and this is Malka and Fega, and this is my mother, Gudel.
Your mother has like a ribbon in her hair.
Yes, that was studded with diamonds. She gave it to me before the war. But it's all gone because they took everything away from us.
Okay. Thank you. Please describe who is in these pictures.
On top is my mother and my father on the bottom.
And the name of your mother?
Gudel.
And the name of your father?
Shepsel.
And when were these pictures taken?
So that was taken before my mother was married in 17 or 18, and this picture was taken before the war in 39.
And where was it taken?
Where my mother's picture was taken, I don't know, but my father's was taken in Vilna.
Thank you. Can you describe this picture?
Yes, this is the picture of my uncle and aunt. And my uncle was the first Jew to be murdered in 1941 when the Germans came in.
What are their names?
Boruch and Dina Abramovich.
Do you know the date this was about, when it was
This
taken?
picture was taken, oh, maybe in the 20s, or maybe even earlier.
And what city was it taken in?
I wouldn't know.
Thank you. Who's in the picture on the left?
That's my brother, Yitzhak, and on the right is my brother, Gershon.
Do you know the year these were taken?
This one was taken in 1938, and the other one about the same time. One was taken in Holshane and one in Vilna.
Which one was in Hoshani?
My brother Gershon, on the right. Yes, and that's the uniform. My brother was in gymnasium.
In
at
Vilna.
that time in Vilna, yeah.
Thank you. What is this picture of?
This is a picture of a Hebrew school, Tarbut, in Holshane,
About what year was it taken?
1926 or 27.
And where are you?
I'm right here in the middle.
Seventh.
The seventh from the left.
And what are you wearing?
I'm wearing a red dress with a white vest.
What was the occasion for this?
It was the school year end.
Thank you. Can you describe this picture?
Yes. This is a group of the Beitar organization. When I first joined it, maybe 2 years I belonged to it.
About
with
what
my
year?
friends. About 28, 29.
What was the name of the group?
Group was Herzl, belonged to the Beitar. Just the group was named Herzl.
And what city was this taken?
In Holshane.
And beginning with the back row on the left, can you name the people?
Yes, that was Isaac Rudnick, myself, and our Nahelet. And this is Rosa Leibman and Yitzhak Soloducha, Basia Kozlovsky on the bottom, Chaya Soloducha, and Fruma Soloducha.
And who survived from this group?
From this group, only 2 people survived. Rosa Leibman and Irving Rudnick. She is in Israel and he is in America.
Thank you. Can you describe this picture?
Yes, this picture was taken in 1934. Some friends from the Beitar were going to Israel, and that was their farewell.
And where are you in this picture?
I'm in the picture, the 3rd row from the bottom, the 4th from the left.
Next to the person in all white?
Yes.
Thank you. Can you describe this story?
Yes, this I wrote for when they were publishing the book, they asked me to describe the camp, the labor camp, HKP, in the cheap housing in Vilna.
And who published this book?
This book was published by survivors, by a committee of survivors. My brother was a member of the committee in Israel.
And what year was it published?
I really have to check. I think in the 60s.
Okay, thank you. Please describe who's in this picture.
This is a picture of my husband in the Polish army in 1937-38.
Where was this taken?
This was taken in Poland.
Thank you. Can you describe this picture?
Yes, this is a remnant of the dress that I wore in 1939. The picture was taken in August of 39, right before the war started. And this is the dress that when we escaped from the labor camp, and I went out in this dress, and this is just the remnants of the dress.
Who were the other people in the picture?
A friend of mine and her sister,
Were their names?
Bessie and don't remember her sister's name,
And where was this taken?
in Podbrodzie, Poland.
And where are you in this picture? Are you
I'm on the right,
the upper row on the right,
the upper row on the right.
in the
yes.
dress?
In the dress, the same dress.
Thank you.
March of 42, he was
March.
6 months old.
Can you describe who is in this picture?
Yes, this is a picture of my son, taken in March of 1942, in the ghetto in Holshani,
Well-
taken by a friend of mine who was a photographer, to send it to my husband. He never saw his son.
What is the name of your son?
Baruch Eli.
Thank you. Please describe these documents.
This letter I wrote to my brother when I found out that he was alive in the Russian army. He was in Poland at that time. They were advancing, and he was an officer in the Russian army.
What's the date on the letter?
The letter is written in Oshmiani, August 29, 1944.
And what's the salutation?
It just says, "My dear Zimochka." My brother's name is Zimel, but in Russian it's...
And when was this picture taken?
This picture must be taken in 1940.
And the name of the person in this picture?
Zimel Abramovich, my youngest brother.
What type of uniform is he wearing?
He's an officer. See, the epaulets have the star on them.
From-
So, an officer's uniform in the Russian army.
Thank you. Please describe who's in this picture.
The picture is of my husband and myself, taken in Vilna in 1946 after my daughter was born.
Thank you. Please describe this picture.
This picture was taken in 1988 in Germany, in Schaumburg, with a monument in the memory of 780 young people from Vilna. And my brother and I were visiting the cemetery.
Thank you. Can you describe this this plaque?
This plaque, my brother brought it from Israel in memory of my two brothers. And he left it there by the monument in Schaumburg, Germany, near Dachau.
Thank you. Please describe this picture.
This picture was taken in Lod, Israel, near Tel Aviv. I'm greeting my brother, whom I haven't seen for 20 years, in 1966.
Thank you.
See, I wasn't a big fat mama like now.
Please describe this picture.
This picture was taken in Florida in December of 1967 with my husband and my two daughters.
Can you give the names of the people beginning from the left?
Lisa, Lou, myself, and Grace.
Thank you. Please describe this picture.
This picture was taken in Scranton, Pennsylvania in 1985. My brother was visiting me from Israel then.
The name of your brother?
Zimel Abramovich.
Thank you. Can you describe this picture?
This picture was taken in 1985 in Lexington, Massachusetts, my grandson Adam's bar mitzvah.
Beginning from the left, can you give the names, please?
That's Scott Schlesinger, a nephew to my son-in-law, my son-in-law's brother-in-law Sheldon Schlesinger, Bobby Schlesinger, and Greg Schlesinger. This is Grace, my daughter, Larry, her husband, Michael, my younger grandson,
It's in front of them.
in front of them, Adam, my older grandson, myself, and my daughter Lisa.
Thank you.